say thank you to all of the speakers who have already spoken and already set an amazing stage. I think it takes so much courage because, as it was already pointed out today, public speaking is the second fear we have. So it is a lot to come up and share some very personal stories. And as you've heard in my bio, you already know a lot about me, that once upon a time, no one had ever known about me. So when One Woman Fearless was announced, I was about to lead a retreat to Peru. I was taking a group of women. I run wild women retreats around the world. And, oh, that was close. Be a different kind of wild. So, a wild trip to the hospital. Not where my night's going. So I was about to lead this retreat, and people just kept sending me this because, I'm the Newfoundlander here with no Newfie accent, in case anybody didn't notice. It's been pointed out quite a few times, but I can break it out for you if he wants me to, right? So when One Woman Fearless in St. John's was announced, everybody just kept sending me this, link, you've got to go and be a speaker, Tonya, And I was getting ready to lead this big, huge retreat in Peru, so I was yeah, I'll think about it. And I didn't even really click on the link. So I come back from Peru, where I just led an amazing group of women up on the Salcantay Pass, which is basically the highest peak in Peru, and it's a 4-day, 75-kilometer trek, up a mountain. And people say, well, you got to be in shape for that, right? And I'm like, no, man. Some of these girls showed up without ever having hiked before. They broke in their hikers on this trail and lost some toenails and found a whole lot of themselves, while they were doing this. So I certainly came home from that feeling very fearless. And so I opened the link and I said, what would I talk about? I submitted my application. I thought, what would I talk about? What will I say at this fearless event? And especially being in my home community where, I do a lot of speaking and events and retreats, so people knew who I was and what would I speak about. What is fearless, and am I fearless? I guess to the outside world, I've blazed my own trail, started my own businesses, did what I wanted to do all along. On the outside, I looked fearless. I looked like, somebody who was doing whatever she wanted to do whenever she wanted to do it. But then I started to look back over my life, and I thought, what am I really fearing? So for most of my life, I ran from who I was. And the reason that I created and did and kept doing and kept pushing and moving forward all the time was to prove myself. Always had something to prove, trying to fill this gap, fill this space, fill this hole that I didn't know that I'd actually felt. Constantly filling this up. And moments of impact, that's what I like to refer to them as, these moments of impact in life where you remember everything. Does anybody have a moment in time like that where you remember where you were? You remember what something smells like, tastes like? You can just bring yourself back there in a moment. And I remember when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, I don't know the exact age and I've never really asked, but I got off the school bus and the police were in my grandparents' driveway. And I lived next door to my grandparents. Now, having had an uncle who had bouts of mental illness and who lived with my grandparents, that wasn't, something that was unusual to see, but this time there was something in my gut as a 10-year-old that told me this is different. And I ran home and I was so scared. And I ran into my bedroom and my mother and my aunt were sitting on the bottom bunk of my sister's bed. I had the top. She was afraid of heights. So I was put on the top bunk. And I remember the room seemed so small and seemed so closed. And I had my school bag here in my right hand. And for my whole life, that image haunted me. I always remembered it. A moment of fear could bring me back to this public speaking, having to speak up to somebody, having to voice my opinion, say, don't treat me like that, don't talk to me this way. I'm a person. I could never do that. And in those moments, I would always have this image of a little girl standing there. My mother was so angry. She just wanted to know. She was yelling. My aunt was yelling. Everybody was screaming. The police are going to come. If you don't tell the truth, we know what's happened. We know what he did to you. You need to tell us. But I froze. I was scared. I thought it was my fault, and I thought that when they found out that it was my fault, I was going to get in trouble. So I said nothing. I had an opportunity to speak, and I didn't. I chose silence. We talk about women's issues and the Me Too movement and how many women spoke up and no one believed you. They wanted me to say, yes. They wanted to put him in jail. They wanted that, but I froze. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. So I shut down. And my life, not because of the abuse, that was tough. I won't lie. Going back in time and dealing with that was tough. But the toughest part was how I silenced myself over and over and over again. I wasn't fearless. So do I have the right today to say, I'm fearless, I'm full of courage? I struggled with even telling my story because I thought I wasn't like my sister. My sister said, yes, this happened. My cousins said, yes, this happened. They went to court. All the kids in the neighborhood made up rhymes about our family. I just wanted to be normal. I wanted to fit in, and I wanted the whole thing to go away. So I stood my ground and I denied it. I called them liars when they said it happened to me too. And I separated myself from my family. I separated myself from my story because I didn't want to be a statistic. I didn't want to be that girl. So I became obsessed. I developed eating disorders, self-harm. I developed drinking problems, promiscuity, all of that goes hand in hand with being a statistic. I was trying to not be a statistic, and in my denial of what had happened to me, I became a statistic. And it was going to be decades before I would be forced to face that truth, because we can only run from our past for so long before that past comes knocking. And that call came like I knew it would. My mother, he's dying. So the person who'd abused me was an uncle, and he was mentally ill. And he was a victim of, the systematic abuse by the Catholic Church. So he was not mentally fit to go to prison. But in 1992, when he was sentenced, the courts determined that he was not mentally fit to go to prison, and that was accurate. He was not. But the difference is in 1992, they asked if he could move back in with my grandparents because he was not mentally fit to go to prison. So they wanted to put him back because it's not that long ago that our justice system has still been failing. And thankfully, my parents and my family said, no, he can't come back and live here. You're putting him in a situation as a sex abuser with children. You can't do that. So thankfully, our family said no. But nobody in my life had ever known. I married a man that I did not tell. Not one of my friends knew. Nobody knew who I was. I woke up one day and I decided that I was going to be somebody else. And in some cases, that really works for us when we make a decision about who we're going to be. But I changed everything about myself. I took this big thing and I put it in a box and I said, that didn't happen. It didn't bother me. It didn't impact me. It was something bad that happened. Bad things happen to people all the time. Move on. But every decision that I made in life was ultimately was because of that decision, to push that away. Who I became. I wouldn't let anyone see me. I wouldn't let anyone close to me. I was too afraid that my broken bits would cut someone. Kept everybody at arm's length, and I became obsessed with my body. I developed eating disorders. I became obsessed with education and taking courses and university because I was trying to separate myself from what statistics said that I would become. And my mother called and said, he's dying. So more than basically 2.5 decades later, it was on my doorstep. Then I had to start telling people why I had a mentally ill uncle that was in a mental institution that I didn't talk about. I had to tell my husband because now the dirty family laundry was rolled out into the floor. And I decided to go to his funeral because I wanted to see how I would react. What would happen? How would I feel? I just felt like I needed that closure. I hadn't seen him since the police took him that day. And when I went to the funeral, I just stood there and I looked at him and I thought, he's a victim too, right? Like I had compassion because I thought he was somebody else's victim and then I became his victim, but we're all just victims of this messed up society that doesn't allow us to talk about things that happen because then we get labeled as broken or damaged and we try to get away from those labels, so we think that we have to push down who we are in order for that to happen. So I had built this life that nobody knew any of these things about me. And I'd become someone that I wasn't in an effort to separate myself from that. And that phone call that day changed the course of how my life would go. I had a thriving fitness and nutrition business. I had a very happy marriage to a man who didn't know me, might I add. So all of these things just really started to come crumbling down. All the bricks of the house that I had built, the walls that I had built, crashed. And I was forced into the darkest moments of my life when I had no choice but to take this box of darkness, where every single thing that had happened to me in life that I didn't like, put in there. Denial, don't deal with it, don't talk about it, don't think about it. And in my mind, I had this really unique ability to escape. And I'm sure if you've suffered any kind of trauma, or childhood trauma especially, you know what I'm talking about. You know that we can take this and we can just, whew, I'm gone. And that's what I spent my entire life doing. So when I woke up one day, I realized I had all these things in my life that I didn't care about. I didn't like. I didn't know who I was. And I was taken on a very deep and profound journey through what I call my dark night of the soul. And that was where I had to take out everything that I had put in this box of darkness, piece by piece, and figure out, who was I? Did I even like eggs? Like, I don't know. What color do I like? It was that extreme that I had just become in every environment. When I was a personal trainer, I was what you needed. When I was a wife, I was what my husband needed. When I was a daughter, I was what my mother needed. But I had no consistency to me. Whatever you needed me to be, that's what I became. Whatever was easier. And that life came crumbling down. And ultimately, through walking through that dark night of the soul, through going through some of the deepest and most painful journeys of my entire life, through therapy. And, numerous people here today have mentioned shamanism, which is amazing because I've also done quite a bit of that mindset journey. All of these things of really tapping into our emotions, our physical body, how we store things, how we store trauma. We carry trauma, it's passed down through generations. We know this from the studies that they are doing on the Holocaust survivors. Many of their grandchildren and great-grandchildren are showing trauma in their body that they could never have experienced. So imagine my trauma, my mother's, my grandmother's, and all of these that we're also carrying, not just our own. No wonder we have become walled up, confused, and we don't know who we are, and that we've lost and leaked our power in every circumstance in life. So as I begin to let everything crumble down, I found myself born new, fresh. Who am I? Now I get to create my life. I get to say what I like and what I don't like. And do you know what happens when you start telling your husband you don't like things that were fine for 15 years? Not too cool. So he was like, well, you didn't mind this for 10 years. I was like, well, guess what? I did, but I didn't tell you. Because I couldn't speak. I'd lost my voice. And every time I tried to speak up, I was reminded of that 10-year-old holding her school bag, terrified that somebody was going to find out some deep, dark secret that I had been hiding. And I want to tell you that today, if you have that box of darkness, because I think all of us do, on some level, every single one of us have been given a box of darkness. Mine might have looked like abuse. Somebody else's yours might look different than mine, but I guarantee you we've all been walking around with this box where anything that we don't like, every time you've been silenced, every time you've been told to sit down, every time you've been called fat, every time you've said all of those things to yourself, whatever happened to you really happened for you to help you grow. And that can be a very deeply painful realization for us to come to, that it's not about what happened to me. It's about what I do about it. And I realized in the telling of my story that my life was different because I didn't speak up. The life I lived when I had a chance to speak was different than my sister's. Because for my sister, it was out there since she was 12 years old. Everybody knew. That was a part of who she was. It was just, but who I became and the life I lived because of that. And so today I know that my story is important because of that, because I speak for women who either were silenced or chose to silence themselves, who in the moment just could not find their power to speak up. And I know that every single one of you in this room has an amazing story, whatever that looks like to you, but we leak our power because we've consistently believed that we're not enough. That we have to be thinner, we have to be fitter, we have to be smarter. I need a few more letters behind my name. I can't do that. But what makes me any different than Charla? If Charlotte can create One Woman Fearless, what can I create? Wild women. That's what I create. I help you go inside and find those places inside of you that really exist, because underneath and inside that box of darkness, when you clear that out, what you will find is the deepest, most powerful, beautiful, amazing, sexy. That girl in there, she knows how to move her hips. She does. She knows how to move her hips. She knows how to ask for what she wants and doesn't apologize for it. She's in there inside of you. And if you have that box that's been holding you back, if you have experiences and trauma or fears or negative thinking or emotional things that have been holding you back, then I encourage you to do that work. Get into it, because I am proof that I did not face my abuse until I was 33 years old at all. And I'm 38 today, and I live a very thriving life. I'm not a survivor. I hated that word. People would say, but you're a survivor, Tonya. And that's why my tagline in my business is do more than exist. To me, surviving felt like I'm existing. Yeah, I survived, but what? Did I live? Did I fully live? Could I open myself up to life, to love, to trust, to belief, to beauty, in spite of having all the reasons not to? And I did, and my life has thrived because of that. And now I get to travel around the world, helping other women do the same, because I took the first step. If somebody had told me that I would have ended up here talking about this 5 years ago, my abuse, I would have been like, oh, hell no, that's never gonna happen. I even remember one time I said, like, I'm gonna deal with my abuse, but like, it will never be in my bio. Where is it? In my bio. So, to clue up, I want to read something, and I'm going to read it off of my paper because I don't want to miss anything in this, because so far my speech has been nothing that I've really written on my paper, which always happens to me. I always wonder why I even bothered to write them. So I'm going to read this to you to kind of clue up today, and I hope that this will leave you with a powerful message, not only from my talk, but from everybody else's talk, and something that is within you. So my message to you today is don't live a half life because of what happened to you. No matter what it is, what you did, didn't do, what you said or didn't say. I promise if you let yourself feel the fear and move through it, lean into it, you will be brought home to your own wild soul. The part of you that you buried with that wound, thinking it would go away, that only the darkness would be taken with it. But it wasn't. It took your light too, your hope, your beauty, your love, your zest, your passion, until there was nothing left but a shell of a person. Until something comes to shake you awake to the way you're not really living at all. And all the work that you have to do is to lean into it, work through the pain, take out that box of darkness and shift through the contents, taking the lessons and leaving the rest, reclaiming the parts of you that you lost with each thing that you packed into that box. As you unpack it and process it, pick up the pieces of the real you that you left behind. That is fearless. Fearless. That's courage to do that work. Because for too long, women have been trained to tread softly, to make others comfortable, to bury ourselves, to dull who we are, to give up ourselves, to sit on a shelf and look pretty. But those days are over. Look within, find who you really are, pick up your sword and fight for yourself. Because it's less about what happened to you and more about what you do about it. Who you become in spite of it, not because of it. Reclaim the warrior inside of you. She's waiting. Thank you.
Tonya Whittle.